Does everyone have a copy of the residential income property purchase agreement and the commercial and residential income listing agreement? Yes. Okay, great. So I'm going to start with our car form CLA, commercial and residential income listing agreement. If you type CLA in zip forms, you'll find this document. It will come along with it the usual suspects that come with any listing agreement, which are the agency disclosure, the wire fraud advisory, the, I think, PRBS, the possible representation of more than one buyer and seller. I don't have that in this package because that we cover in our standard listing and purchase agreement classes. So we're just gonna focus on the parts of the listing agreement that are different than your standard residential listing, which is a single family or condo, right? In real estate, the term commercial is a really broad term. So when you think commercial agent, you think strip malls, big buildings. Technically, anything over 4 units, meaning like a 4-plex, is a commercial property. Now, that still leaves some multifamily property that's uncovered, and that would be anything from 2 to 4 units. And so that's what we're focusing on here because we are primarily residential agents, and there is a whole new set of rules that apply to anything that is 5 units and bigger. If I had a listing that was 5 units or more, I would take a co-listing agent that was a commercial agent. All right, ethically speaking, from our code of ethics, from our board, same thing. If you are not qualified to represent the client, you need to bring in someone who is, okay, or refer it out. I recommend bringing someone in. The reason why is because I want to learn so that next time I am qualified, maybe, if I'm ready, to do it myself. All right, so back to the document. At the top, we have date prepared, which is a legal reference date only. If you make any changes to the terms within your listing agreement, the document that you use, the modification of terms, MOT, is the acronym in car forms. It's going to reference this date prepared of the listing contract. Below that, you have a line for the owner's name. Guys, where do we get the owner's name?
Public records.
You can try public records.
Title
Is going to be the most up to date. So if you ask your title rep for, what's the term, guys? Vesting. Yeah, so legal is your legal description, and that's, you can ask for that. But as far as your, and I would probably ask for that, legal investing. The reason why is because it's also going to show you your legal city. And you always want to know what your legal city is so that very specific rules like rent control, which we'll discuss in detail later, apply to. Let's see. So you're going to get the full name of the owner, and the reason I don't go public records is because on public records there's only a short line to list the owner's name. If it's a trust or an LLC, a lot of times I only get a partial name. If there are multiple owners, a lot of times it's missing someone's name. And another reason why is because I could have recently recorded a deed, right?
Yeah.
Preparing for sale, transferring into a trust. That's why I asked for title to send me the most recent vesting.
Yes, that makes sense.
So once I have that, I'm entering the owner's name in here. And the line below is not you as the agent for broker. It is Keller Williams Beverly Hills, not KW, not KWBH, not Keller Williams Calabasas. It is Keller Williams Beverly Hills. All right. Beginning date. So the beginning date is not usually the day you sign this contract. However, I like it to be, and I highly encourage you also to try to get your listing period to start on the day that you take a listing. Why? Because once it's yours, it's yours. Once the contract is active, it's active. Now this poses some problems. Why? Because our MLS requires that any new listings we take goes into the MLS within 48 hours. That's a problem because if I just sign listing documentation, I probably don't need all the information I need on a regular residential listing, let alone one that's an income property with tenants, rent rolls, expenses, things like that. And I certainly don't have any quality photos. So, yes.
So do you have the residential contract also, the listing contract?
It's attached.
Oh, it's attached.
Yeah.
Towards the back.
Oh, is it in the back? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
yes.
shorter, so I like to start with it.
Okay,
Makes
I
me
see it.
feel
Thank
better.
I'm sorry, it's my fault, that was late.
No, you're fine. Okay, so, where was I? Oh, so the workaround for this, guys, is just like with regular residential listing agreement. I start the listing period the day I have it signed, if at all possible, knowing that it's gonna take me some time to actually get the property ready for listing. If I'm not going to put the listing on the MLS, what form do I need? SELM. Seller instruction to exclude from the multiple listing service, right? It doesn't really matter what date you put in there, as long as it gives you enough time to get it ready before you enter it there. That's not even what I'm gonna have you do, because if you use an SELM, this form, it saves you from having to put the listing on the MLS in 48 hours. But what it does not save you from is showing days on market once you do actually go live to the MLS. So what's my additional workaround for that? Modification of terms. What do? So once I actually know what day all of my collateral, meaning my marketing materials, photos, and info is ready to actually take my listing to the MLS live and be fully prepared, I use a modification of terms that actually modifies the listing period. So what I do on the modification of terms is I delete the SELM in its entirety, and I modify the listing period to start the day I'm ready to launch it on the MLS. So I want it to show 0 days on market. Yes.
What's the advantage of that form to sending a brand new listing?
Well, because it ensures that my original listing period, where I may have been shopping my new listing off market, was a valid listing period. I'm already being tricky with the MLS. These rules are allowed, the way my method is allowed. If you do it another way, I'm not sure. So I'm just covering you, the brokerage, and your client for liability, right? So I would do it that way if at all possible.
So both forms, you have to have the SELM and the MOT?
You don't have to have the MOT, but if you don't, you're gonna have to show days on market.
Right.
I don't do the MOT though until I'm closer to the time I'm ready to go to the market. Why? Because I don't know what day that is, right? I don't know what day that's going to be. And once again, just like I wanted that listing period to start the day that they signed it, so it's actually my listing, I also want the MOT to be the date I go live. Because I don't have any lapse as protection as the listing agent. We have a valid contract. All right, so moving on to the ending date, the expiration period. If you're going to modify the beginning date of your listing, you may or may not want to modify the ending date on that same MOT. If I think it's gonna be a multi-process sale where I'm gonna have trouble selling it, or the seller wants to list it at a price that comps don't reflect. Oh wow, see, I'm using video approved language. I think we can all read between the lines there. Then I might also extend the expiration of my listing to give me the full 6 months from the time it starts. Okay, so moving on, the city, make sure you have that legal city. You get that from the legal portion of that legal investing you got from title, because Sherman Oaks is LA, Culver City is its own city, Brentwood is actually a legal name of a city in Northern California, but it's an area here that's technically Los Angeles, so you want to get it right. Okay. All right, so
you said you take it off title?
Yeah, you ask a title rep or their customer service department for, I don't even want to see this, it's making me self-conscious, which is why I'm not looking at you much during class. Ask their customer service or your title rep for legal investing.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so item number 2. Items excluded and included. The only reason I'm bringing your attention to this is because it's extra important that you are accurate with items that should be included or excluded with the listing and offered for sale. Why? There are probably tenants in the property. Things might belong to them. So you may be advertising with washer and dryer. It actually belongs to the tenant. So you'll need to find these things out. You may actually need to amend the terms of your listing agreement for minutia stuff like this later, although it's not necessarily necessary. As long as your purchase agreement is right and your seller and your buyer agree to it, this is sort of a starting place, the inclusions and exclusions. But you want to be aware as a listing agent, because you want to be the best listing agent there is. You want to give potential buyers the best, most accurate information possible. So, you know, you need to find those things out. And we'll go over that in some more detail. And I know it's a little confusing, but we'll go into it in more detail when we're doing the purchase contract portion of the income class. But the other things you need to look out for are community area, which common area that the tenants use. You know, like common area driveways. There may be barbecues. There may be a communal laundry room with equipment there. You need to find out who that belongs to, who has access to it and use. Same thing with garages. You know, there may be parking spaces included with certain tenants' leases. You need to just be aware of these things. This is a place to start thinking about that. When we're talking about inclusions and exclusions, we're actually talking about physical possessions, but it's a good place to start your conversation with your client about the parking spaces and other things. Right now, we're only talking about the actual physical items within the property. Yes?
I have a question. Would this be for units 1 to 4 or no, you wouldn't use
Yes, units 1 to
you
4.
use this also? Okay.
No, this is only units 1 to 4.
Okay,
Units 5 and up, you don't actually even have to use car forms.
okay.
Like I said, if it was me, I would bring in a commercial agent and I would defer to them. It's not my area of expertise, so I would stay out of it. But they have something called air forms, and I'm not.
Yes, I watched the video.
Yeah.
I last saw that. Yeah.
And I don't know if that's better or not.
Yeah, it's different.
It's different, yeah. And I'm not qualified to tell you
Okay.
anything about it, so I'm gonna stay away from that. All right, so we're gonna move on to page, and like I said, I'm only going over stuff that's different from your regular listing agreement. So we're gonna move on to page 3. At the top of page 3, there's a section titled Owner Representations. It is, let's see, page 3, section C6. Owner represents that unless otherwise specified in writing, owner is unaware of any notice of default recorded against the property, any delinquent amounts due under any loan secured by, or any other obligation affecting the property, any bankruptcy, insolvency, or similar proceeding affecting the property, any litigation, arbitration, administrative action, government investigation, or other pending or threatened action that affects or may affect the property or owner's ability to transfer it. Any current, pending, or proposed special assessments affecting the property, owner shall promptly notify broker in writing if owner becomes aware of any of these during the listing period or any extension thereof. This is especially important because this would extend to, especially in the city of LA, anything that's under rent control, any tenant complaints against the landlord with the city, all right? Just below that, section 7, broker and owner duties. I'm not gonna read this huge section, but what is really important about it is that it says that the broker and the seller are both responsible for making every reasonable effort basically to gather all information that would affect the value of the property or anything that should be disclosed. And why do I think that's especially important with income property? Well, you have operating expenses, leases. You may have some people who don't actually have a written lease. You may have some people on a month-to-month lease. And these can cause problems and disputes later for someone in escrow, a seller in escrow, and a listing agent who's trying to close that sale, buyer's agent, and also the buyer as they become the new owner, right? How can they enforce something that they don't have record of through their sale? So do yourself a favor. If you're gonna list income property, at the time you take the listing, ask the seller for these documents, copies of the leases, info on what they need, copy as in relation to their operating expenses, what monthly services do they have on it? Do they have records for all the repairs they've done, recently? Because these numbers are gonna be important for a potential buyer. Yeah.
What recourse does the agent have when the tenant is not being cooperative, like he doesn't let you show the property, you've made an appointment with a prospective?
The agent has zero recourse. The seller has tons of recourse, including eviction.
But if the seller is incapacitated or fails to do so, or just kind of is laissez-faire?
If they have a power of attorney, perhaps a power of attorney, and then it would be something I would discuss with, I think your only recourse if they're not granting you access under state law is probably an eviction attorney. Consult with them.
But that would be, again, the seller, the agent cannot,
Exactly.
okay.
I mean, can the seller, or can the agent do it on behalf of the seller with the seller? Yeah. If they have a power of attorney with someone, definitely. You know, if you have access to someone who knows about eviction, but I would still only talk to an eviction attorney. What, can you speak to them hypothetically? Definitely. But you can't do much, no, in legal proceedings unless you're the actual owner or their power of attorney. And even then, there may be stipulations. Real estate has something called a special power of attorney. And I know that it at least applies in the point of purchase or sale, where it's a special power of attorney because it's only in relation to that singular property. I don't know if that extends to evictions or not. Okay.
So you said ask for copies of the leases, recent repairs.
Yeah. Recent repairs, like, you know, if they know anything needs to be replaced, these all go in the disclosures, but, you know, it's best to have as much information up front, and especially with income property, because everything that's going on with it is going to drastically affect the desirability of the property. If you don't know what the rents are,
Can't determine
you
cap rate.
can't really even set a buyer up for whether or not they want to make the purchase if it's occupied, and you have to either, if it's not rent control, you have to honor every existing lease term until its end before you can ask the tenant to leave. If it's rent control, you can almost never get rid of them. So it's really important to find out what those rents are. So that also helps you in your listing at the time you're pricing. If I have a gorgeous, perfect building, you know, a triplex that has great tenants in it that pay their rent on time, but current market value rent for those units would probably be closer to $4,000 a month, and they're all paying closer to like $1,200 a month. Can I sell that building for the same price I could an empty one? No, because the new owner is going to be going out of pocket to cover their carrying costs, right? It's a longer term investment. Maybe it makes sense for someone who can pay cash, right? But it eliminates most of my buyers now. So my next door neighbor could have sold the same building I have, mirror image, and got 500,000 more maybe. I'm just throwing a number out there randomly, because their unit or their building was empty, whereas mine has tenants in place, protected under rent control, that have ridiculously low rents. So it's a crummy situation to be in. Yes.
I think it's important to tell your clients to legally raise their rent whenever they can. I have sellers who tell me, oh, I just want to be nice and I haven't raised rent in 10 years on my duplex or triplex. And I tell them, well, that's foolish, because you want to be nice, they're paying you $800 for a one bedroom, but you're ruining the value when it comes time to sell. And they're telling you, well, in a couple of years I want to sell when my son finishes college because I'm going back to,
Right.
you know, Missouri or wherever. And I'm like, you're affecting the value of your property.
Right.
Because you're not, you know, and if it's rent control,
Right.
you can only do 3% or 2.75, then do that.
Yeah, in the city of
But
LA,
you
for the
do
longest
it,
time,
you
it's been
know.
3%. There have been a few deviations even in the last few decades as far as my knowledge is.
Beverly Hills is 4.1.
Yeah, and Beverly Hills and West Hollywood also have very complex rent control laws. I'm not even going to discuss those because I'm not super familiar with them. I'm familiar enough to get by, but not enough to teach a class on. But yes, another way that I position that with owners is that, you know, not even when they want to sell, if you plan on leaving your legacy, your inheritance to your family, to your children, to your spouse, but they can't even sell it.
Mhm.
Like, it's not that they can't even sell it.
That's
Nobody
the price,
wants
yeah.
that building. It doesn't make sense for them financially. So if they're not increasing their tenants' rents yearly, that might mean that their children, their spouse that is left to grieve, is now in a very bad financial situation.
Is there a website that you could go to and put in the address and it says, like, according to that city's
Yes.
rules, what percentage they could increase the rent by?
I don't know about every city, but for LA is something RSO. If you just look up the RSO for Los Angeles, it has a table of the percentage you can do every year. I think upwards of 10 years has been 3% yearly. It is 3% in 2019. You can only do it once every 12 months. As far as finding out if a property is rent control, you guys should definitely write this one down. You can use the website ZMIS, ZIMAS dot lacity.org. ZIMAS, ZIMAS dot lacity.org. Then you're going to go to a section called housing. I'm sorry, excuse me, back it up. You're gonna go to that website and there's going to be a place for you to pop in an address. You pop in only the numeric portion and the street address. So no east, no west, no avenue, no, those are referred to as prefix and suffix. If you didn't know, you should know because you're a real estate agent. If you didn't, so the street number, the street name, once you put that in, even if there are more than one, it will then show you like north, south, or east, west. You select the correct one if there's more than one selection. It will take you to this screen and you should even check it out, it's pretty cool. It will tell you all about the property. Some of it's way overkill, like every ordinance on earth that could possibly affect the entire area, environmental studies stuff. But there is this one section on the left-hand side that you should expand every time you are looking at an income property. It's called housing. When you click on it, there'll be a little section that says RSO, and it just simply says yes or no. If it says no, you're golden. Go sell, go, all you have to do is honor the existing lease terms. If the lease is up, the owner can give 30 or 60 days notice per Cal State law, depending upon how long that tenant has been a resident there. I believe that if it's 1 year or over, it's a 60-day notice. If it's under, it's 30-day. So yeah, check on ZIMAS. If it says yes, and you have a bunch of tenants in place, oh boy, do you have your work cut out for you. Not to say that it can't happen.
Can you buy them out?
So there's something called cash for keys. And it can be legally binding. I would be very careful with it though. So there are only certain reasons you can relocate a tenant. And
If you're moving in yourself.
if you're moving in yourself or you're placing any of your immediate family, which means mother, father, sister, brother, daughter, son. So also there's restrictions that if any of these people own property, I think in the city, or if you own too much property, or there are other units available or empty, and then even then it's like the most recent tenant within that building you want to take an owner occupied unit for, it has to be that one. There are some ways around even that. Let's say you have a duplex and you want to get that terrible tenant downstairs that's super loud all the time out, or upstairs that's out all the time, right? But the unit downstairs, that's the tenant who moved in last. The city's gonna say you need to take the one that moved in last, which is probably your higher rent paying tenant also, right? Problematic.
Also, how do you find out what the amount is that you need to pay?
So you can go to the same RSO through Los Angeles.
Okay.
But here's the complex part about it, right? We are taught as agents to stay away from age, familial status, all of these things, right? Well, all of these things directly affect what the relocation payment that is required by the city of LA is. So also, even if you're cash for keys, like this is the term for when you're offering a tenant financial incentive to leave, even when it is agreed to by the tenant, they can back out of it and it's not enforceable unless it's at least the amount that the city would stipulate if you had a valid reason they could enforce from the city side of relocating your tenant. So be very careful if you think you're getting a steal and getting a deal and getting them out of there for less than what it would cost, should you actually be able to apply for and get approved for tenant relocation, okay?
How much time does the tenant have to change their mind?
I don't know. They have whole companies and people who are dedicated to doing just this in large buildings. I can give you the name of a friend I used to work with who does exclusively this now and let you talk to him if you want.
So what if you've raised the rent to the point where the market doesn't support it anymore? Is that the next thing?
Sorry.
Oh, it's
Repeat.
that, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And you really can't raise it anymore, or you've raised it too high and...
What do you mean raised it too high?
I don't know, I guess I'm asking if for any reason whatsoever you have to lower it, do you get a credit towards like,
Lower the rent?
yeah, I
Why
don't,
would you lower the rent? I'm confused.
I guess
Let's
you
start
wouldn't.
over.
You never.
I guess you wouldn't.
Why would you ever lower the rent?
Well, what if they made a mistake and they broke, somehow got
Keep the money.
4%, even though it's only allowed 3%?
Oh, well, then you better go refund that money back real quick,
That's-
say
I
you're
think
super
that's what
sorry
I'm saying.
and
Yeah,
fix it
that's-
right on up. This is only, okay, so let's talk about what basic criteria for rent control is first off. Always go to ZEMAS and double check. But typically speaking, okay, so single families are always, are never. Single families are never subject to rent control, okay? They're still subject to landlord-tenant law. Condos are almost never subject to rent control. There is a very strange exception, and that is because sometimes apartment buildings are converted into condominiums. And so if an apartment happened to be converted into a condominium and it happened to be rent control at the time it was an apartment, that rent control actually extends to tenants of the new owners who own those individual units. Very, very rare. How do you find this out? ZEMAS. ZEMAS is the only place I know to actually find this out. Because you're not gonna know most of the time if something was an apartment conversion. Then as all multifamily in the city of LA are subject to rent control, but all of these are only if it was built prior to 1978. 1978, you're golden. Anything 1978 or after, don't worry about it. Make sense? I guess I should have started the opposite way around. So let me work through it again. So the first thing you need to check is, was this dwelling built prior to 1978? If it was not, you're good. But if it was built prior to 1978, then you're gonna check, is it a single family? If it's a single family, you don't have to worry about it. It's not subject to rent control. Is it a condo? Most likely you're good, but not in all cases. If it was previously an apartment that was converted, that was subject to rent control at that time, it could still be subject to rent control, check ZEMAS. And then a multifamily built prior to 1978, there is, without exception, is subject to rent control. Yay, logical. We did it the right way. Okay, so let's see here. We already talked about the rent roll, rent control. Oh, in the city of Los Angeles, if it's subject, it may be all of city of LA, but definitely rent control. Security deposits for tenants are to be held in an interest-bearing account, and the interest is to be given to them on the time they move out. It's only since like I lived someplace for 4 years, and I think they owed me like $2.13 or something, right? But it's actually a really big deal, and the city of LA takes it very seriously. So most property owners don't know this, but they are supposed to have a separate account, completely separate bank account, that all tenant security deposits go into, and it's never supposed to be commingled with any money, and it's supposed to be an interest-bearing account. And that would get kind of complex if you have a fourplex, right? You would probably actually have to have 4 separate bank accounts. How annoying, right? Because if you're commingling the tenant's funds, how are you supposed to know what interest it is? And let me tell you, I didn't even know what it was on my own. I didn't even want to think about it or have to work it out. I didn't want to have to call the city and ask, well, you know, I moved in in July, right? So now I have to prorate the months and the days in relation to overpay the tenant. Just give them a $20 bill and tell them, thank you very much. Save yourself some hassle. Better to overpay than underpay. No one's gonna fault you for overpaying. Yes?
Back to the cash for keys, did you mention a restriction? Is there a restriction for the amount of cash?
So they can agree to it, but I think if they have a problem and it's not a minimum of the amount that they would be entitled to through the city regulation for relocation fees, I think that even if they took the money, you might not be able to enforce it. I don't know how it works.
It's usually a substantial amount of money too, right?
Yeah,
Like
usually
$8,000
you're
or something.
incentivizing them over and beyond what relocation would be. The reason why is you can't get them out unless you're gonna live in it yourself, and you're not going to. You want tenants in there that are paying you rent.
There's an agent in this office. She shared with me to get a tenant out in West Hollywood. They settled on $44,000.
Yeah, I mean, they're paying a lot of money.
The tenant, so also the age matters, like you were saying. The tenant was an older person,
Yeah.
Yeah,
age matters, if you have dependent children
Yeah.
matters, if you have a permanent handicap, you can,
Yeah.
and you've been living there a certain period of time,
She's been
you
there.
can almost never be evicted.
Yeah, she's been there for over 15 years, and the only way she was gonna move, and they kept negotiating back and forth, 25, 30,000, back and they settled like 44, 45,000 eventually.
Which, if she had me as a friend, I would tell her, hell no, because 44,000, that's gonna pay your rent difference for 1 year.
I mean,
That's
it's, yeah, I don't know, it wasn't my listing, this was.
Yeah, I'm just saying, so the owner is actually lucky paying $44,000 to get that tenant out,
At least it's not commercial,
right?
cost you significantly more.
Depending on the contract,
But is there rent control for commercial as well?
No. but it's lease terms.
But
Yeah,
yeah, lease
right.
terms, if they have a contract. for
Breaking
the next
lease,
10
that's
years.
all negotiable. If you have to
Yeah.
break lease, or, that's different.
Usually
But
pay a
yeah.
couple months or something.
Well, you can't
We
go
know, we're
across
breaking
it.
a lease, we're helping our
Yeah.
buyer client break a lease right now, but on amiable terms, trying to find a replacement tenant. Alright, so we went over all of this. I've already mentioned parking. Parking is a very contentious situation a lot of times in rentals, so you wanna make sure that you have all of that in writing. We're gonna go over it in the purchase contract, but there's something called the tenant estoppel certificate, which you want to get. Why? Because it goes over the terms of all these basic things, like what appliances are included, what the security deposit amount is, what the rent amount is, any storage, like the basic terms of your tenancy, and the tenant also signs off on it. So I can't tell you how many times, you know, a building's been sold once or twice, you have a long-term tenant there, and what they have is nothing like what their original lease was. Maybe this was a verbal agreement between a past owner. All I'm saying is, make sure the tenant signs off on it. Because if there's a dispute at the beginning about what the tenant's entitled to, obviously that's going to be a big issue for the buyer. And who's the buyer gonna go after if they have major issues when you disclosed information to them that wasn't accurate? Or that at least their tenant is saying isn't accurate? If you have a tenant estoppel certificate, however, that the tenant signs off on, and they're actually the ones who fill it out, by the way, how can that come into play? It can't. All right,
Do you check off a box for that, or is that an extra?
that's actually in the
separate
purchase
form?
contract.
It's in the purchase contract.
Yeah. And I am actually going to break, do you guys need to move your cards?
No.
No. I'm gonna break for 10 minutes, and then we're gonna come back and do the purchase contract, because there is nothing, else here that deviates from our standard listing agreement. Okay.